Here to the Académie Royale de Belgique, to this internal session of the shared SFPI. We have here again today. Yesterday we had a session, some of you were there, on the cooperative principles and especially the second of the democratic member participation, kicking off this discussion on basically relationships, seeing firms as networks of relationships. And this is, so to speak, the second part of that, where again our invited guest Lucio Biggiero and myself will give some basic input as to some possible methodologies and frameworks as to how to interpret the firm and how to look at the future, in fact, of the firm in its environment. So without further ado, I would like to give the word over to Lucio, who would like to introduce this innovative network perspective. And yes, so I will share the screen, and then now.
Maybe could you stand there so that we can see you and the camera will get you?
Okay, because I'd like to indicate something.
Yeah.
Like, okay, this way is fine.
Yeah, it's because see if you're there, they don't see you. See, if you come closer, more in the center. Yeah, so there you see that you are on the camera.
Yeah, in the camera.
Here you can
okay.
It's for people
on the
online.
left side.
Yeah.
To continue.
Yeah.
To go to the next slide.
Okay.
And I will close this.
Okay. That was the tricky.
So that people see you.
Okay, so good afternoon, everybody, and thank you, Isabel and Jerome, to invite me here for this speech about network perspective on social phenomena. First thing to say is that network analysis is all about you. It's not old like statistics, which also, by the way, is not so old discipline. I mean, the end of the 18th century. So it's not so old. And let's say that network analysis is, let's say, 50 years younger than statistics, more or less. And its strong development actually started in the 60s and 70s. And one nice thing is that it started more, sometimes economics is ahead with respect to other disciplines in social sciences. In this case, not. And I will propose my explanation of why economics is so late in getting this approach. Because it's not only an approach, it's also an epistemology. It's a methodology with a lot of epistemological implications. And that's why that is my idea, my opinion, that economics is a bit late in using this perspective, this approach. Actually, it was developed mostly by sociology, and also anthropology, the structure of kin relationships. It was one of the main fields of application at the beginning, and psychology as well, structure of relationships, group behavior, and later on came management studies, which, especially in the field of organization studies, is very much overlapped, let's say, with sociology. I mean, sociologists of organization are at the same time authors, considered authors into the field of organization science, also into the field of management. So the two things have been developed together. And actually, economics which is actually a galaxy of different approaches. So it's always very hard to speak of economics because there is a mainstream and so many different variants, more or less closely related to the mainstream, provided that there is a consensus on what is a mainstream. And but anyway, came as was the latecomer into using this methodology. Now I will try to argue, I mean, about what is new in the network perspective, why it is worth to use it, and what are the implications. And at the end, I will come back actually in the question of economics, management, sociology, and how they use this approach. Okay. So let's start from a very, in my view, a very important point, which is substantially philosophic. I mean, in the sense that it deals with what is reality, what is ontology. And so my view is that reality is made by two relatively independent ontological dimensions. I will explain right after why relatively and not totally independent, but relatively independent ontological dimensions. So one dimension is that of the attributes of elements in general. Elements can be, in natural sciences, can be objects, can be physical objects, can be animals, can be in biology, or can be anything. In social sciences, elements usually are individuals, or even groups of individuals. A company, an organization is a group, an individual, and so it could be considered as a single unity. And call it agent. Language sometimes is hiding other meanings. But let's say in first approximation, we can take the word of agent as actor, as the same. So economists like to speak of agents, and sociologists like to speak of actors. So to underline the social nature of this element. But by the way, now we can take and speak as if they were the same thing, agents. So one ontological dimension is that of agents' attributes. So what are agents' attributes, for example? Age, size, weight, height, strength, income, color, religion, blah, blah, blah. Any kind of specificity, something that is specific, that is describing one agent or one class of agents. These are typically attributes. If we are studying social aspects, we will speak about age, size, religion, political party, blah, blah, blah. If we were speaking of, taking a more economic interest in studying, it will be income, it will be richness, it will be other variables, but typically variables. And what are variables? Variables are attributes. So something that is specifying and distinguishing one actor from another, or one class of actors from another class of actors. The question of distinction is is very much stressed into the field of cybernetics, for instance, no? Second order, especially second order cybernetics, in general in the constructivist epistemology. There is, there was a very famous sentence by Gregory Bateson. That is, what is an information? Information is created when you can distinguish, you can make a difference between one element and another element, basically. No, so distinctions. What is distinctive of single agents or class of agents? These are the attributes. And this is very well known. I mean, this is intuitively and in our cognitive structure as simple individuals, cognitive individuals, and also as researchers. We have been all of us trained in statistics, dealing with variables. When we write down an equation, y equal ax, we are writing down connecting two variables, so two attributes. Income is determined, so function of blah, 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 some other variable. Variables. This is what we have in mind, what we have been trained to deal with. So for the standard researcher, doing science means working with variables. The other, but when comes the problem, the point, is that there is another ontological dimension. It is that of connections, or if you like, relations. And connections, we can say that the connection is strong or weak. There is a single connection, multiple connection. We can also make distinctions about types of connections. But it is another ontological dimension. And why it is another ontological dimension? Because you cannot go from one to the other. No, at least not always, not simply. It's like to say, how to say, distance and weight. Can you transform kilos into kilometers? It's a bit hard. Not two dimensions of reality. So two things that they are orthogonal one with the other, are describing different aspects of reality. Let's try to see this in this slide. So on one side with the elements-based dimension, there is attributes, variables of single elements, can be single points, people, systems also. And in this case, they are taken singularly or collectively. And now we are looking at their properties. The properties of the actors or the properties of the objects. Large, small, whatever. The other dimension is the relations-based dimension. And in this, which is actually the same of say, network dimension. No? In the case of network, we are looking at something different. So how elements are connected, if and how are connected one another. So regardless, and that was actually the true starting point of the network analysis, the question is, regardless of the type of actors or regardless of type of elements, can we study, can we analyze how these elements are connected, if and how they are connected one another? Are there some properties belonging to the dimension of connectivity and not to the dimension of attributes? You can be big or small, young or old, whatever, but the question when we are talking and we want to understand if you are connected with others. So we are looking at another perspective, which is that of connections. So it's not almost impossible, or sometimes it's possible, but this is a very subtle issue. In some specific ways or circumstances, you can have. That's why relatively independent. I will make an example in a few minutes, how to go from one to the other dimension. But in general, they are distinguished, even if not totally independent. No? When we are looking at the relation-based dimension, we are looking at the distribution of connections, so links distribution among the systems or among the elements, among the actors, whatever is our elementary unit of analysis. The elementary unit can be, and I will show now in a moment, examples of networks made by single individuals or organizations or communities or countries. The level can change, the level of aggregation, but you can apply the same perspective, just choosing what is your element, the class of elements you are looking. And when you want to understand how they are connected to one another. Now, why they are relatively independent? Because it's possible that there is an influence from one dimension to the other over time. That's why there is a possible to see, but it's quite a bit complicated to see how what happens in one dimension is going to influence what happens in the other dimension. That's why relatively independent and not totally independent. There are not two dimensions that are going each for their own. Yes, they have determinants inside the same dimension, but they have also influences, reciprocal influences between the two dimensions. So that's why I use this definition of relatively independent. And so, for example, the degree of connectivity as measured by the number and types of connections of a company can influence its degree of competitiveness as measured by its economic financial parameters. So in other words, if you are a company with a lot of partners, this is a typical topological property, links with the partners, connections. But having many partners will influence your performance. And your performance, as we can measure using, let's say, economic financial indicators, return on investment, sales, whatever, they are attributes. So the topological dimension is influencing the attributive dimension. So we can look at this in this other slide. So we can, we should think at this sort of circular causality, between these two dimensions. That is, what happens in the topological position. So the connectivity, the type of connectivity of a company, of an organization, or whatever it is. Do we want to speak of single agents, of single actors? Yes. How many friends is a question of topology, okay? Is a question of connectivity, structures. But how many friends you have also influences your character. And your character is a question of attributes. It's exactly the same logic. So one dimension influences the other, and vice versa, because if you have an open character, it will be easier that you make many friends, and vice versa. And if you are a closed character, introvert character, you will not make many friends. So your degree of connectivity will be very low. So the two dimensions influence one another, mutually influencing. Exactly as the companies. If a company, I can make the analogy, if a company has a very high performance, is a high competitiveness, then other companies would like to be partners of this company. So attributes, high competitiveness will influence the position in terms of topology, in terms of connections, and vice versa. So, okay, so that's why they are two relatively independent ontological dimensions. Another example is this one. This is called the triadic closure property. This is a bit complicated, but I want to tell you in very simple words. That is, it is very likely that my friends will be friends, and your friends will be friends. Why? Because most likely I will choose my friends according to some attributes, age, religion, job, other questions that belong to the world of attributes. And so if my friends are chosen this way, more or less intentionally, doesn't matter, it is likely that they will like one another as well. Of course, it's not a mathematical theorem in the sense that not always happens. Sometimes some friends are absolutely incompatible and they hate one another. Okay. It's a question of probability. And this type, and this is called triadic closure property, because we have to imagine a triad. It's me and my two friends. And so I have one link with friend A and one other link with friend B. And B and C, my friends B and C, most likely are friends as well. So the triad is closed. And that's why it's called triadic closure property. Okay, and this property has a lot of implications. So if we have time later, maybe in the discussion we'll tell you more about this. Okay, let's jump this to, okay, examples. In this case, this is the representation of a typical organizational chart. There is a typical hierarchy, the general manager, the executive managers, and then the middle managers, MM, and then the operatives in blue points. So we can represent the structure of any organization in this way. In this case, links are decisions, and the decisions flow from the top, so from the manager, the general manager, to the bottom, to the operatives, to the workers. And this is a very good representation. It tells us a lot of things. It tells us that this is a graph. Actually, network analysis, I probably say, that is a branch of mathematics called graph theory. And this is a graph. And more precisely is what is called in the jargon of network analysis, graph theory. It is a directed, because there is the direction in the connections, arcs, as called, directed acyclic graph. Acyclic, there are no cycles. there is no triad, no closed triad in this case, no? So decisions flow, okay, from the top to the bottom. And there is no any reciprocity. What's the topic that we discussed yesterday? That's why this is a form of, Herbert Simon called it the archetype of hierarchy. The archetype. Actually, the archetype is not really this one. There is a structure more essential than this, but it's not so important. Let's also consider it the archetype of hierarchy. And in the archetype of hierarchy, we can look at the very simple properties, but very important. What does it mean? It means that there must be a person with only out links, and no any in edge. Who will be that person? The boss. Because the boss does not receive any order and only puts order on the others. And at the opposite, there must be workers at the bottom level who gets only in edge. So decisions, they receive orders from the superior and have no any out edge. So we could say that, roughly speaking, in any structure in which there is a node with only out edge and many nodes, many elements, many people with only in edge, this is a hierarchical graph. This is a hierarchical structure. Then can be many or few layers in the middle. There can be a middle management that can be not many, but some layers, some levels, some ranks. But basically, that's the structure. One with only out, many with only in. That's, let's say, is in a sort of sloganistic approach. It's very simplified, not the sense of the hierarchy. And that's a good representation of the very end. No. Go ahead. What? Okay. This is another example. That is a real world example. It's the knowledge network between firms in the giant component of the ICT cluster of the Lazio region. So in this case, the nodes, the elements, are not single individuals, like in the previous figure. Here, elements are companies, are firms. And what also is different? It is different, the meaning of the links. In the previous figure, the links were representing decisions. In this case, the links are representing knowledge flow. How much knowledge, if any, and how much knowledge is flowing from one company to the other company. And this was the outcome of an applied survey on this industrial cluster of the ICT cluster in the Lazio region, and provided these two differences. These two figures, the previous one and this one, have in common that this is a directed graph as well. So knowledge can flow from one to another firm and not vice versa. Or maybe both, and there will be bidirectional arrow. But at simple, immediate visual inspection, you can see that the two figures are very different. No? This is much less hierarchical than the previous one. Much less hierarchical. Why? Because there is not a top element that is influencing in a cascade all the others. in sequence of the others. There is not a top-down structure. There can be some firms more connected than others. And we can see, for example, these companies are some of the most connected. These are evidence in the circles. But it doesn't mean that they dominate all the others, which is the logic of hierarchy. No? Some is the boss of everybody else, no? In a chain of connection, chain of decisions. No, here there is some company that actually is more important, is able to access more knowledge, is placed into a strategic point of the network. And so they can gain a competitive advantage respect to the others, because, by the way, the ICT is a high-tech industry, no? And so accessing knowledge is an important factor of competitiveness. So even this simple visual inspection can tell us a lot of things. So if you are an investor, for instance, or if you are a policymaker that has to make policies for this cluster, this is a very important representation. So on which company will you invest? Or in which company, if you are the policymaker and you are managing the financial aspect, the policy, which are your champions, with whom you want to do something? To propagate innovations, for instance. Where do innovations will start? Most probably not in the periphery, most probably in the center of the network. And this is a very intuitive index, concept. That is, the more central you are, the more competitive, the better it is for you. In this case, because it means that will be easier to access knowledge. And by the way, actually, this study was funded by an institution of the Lazio region that was just doing industrial policies, and particularly funding. So in which company to develop innovations? It was the question of the 2005, so quite innovative approach. Into the field of policy. Sometimes it's not innovative in the view. They just asked me to do this research to say, okay, we have some amount of money or investment to do. In which company we have to place this money? So. Okay, I can do it just myself. Don't worry. It's here.
Autorize. No, wrong.
You can give me the rights at school, and I can, because you cannot do that from your laptop.
Because I am sharing the screen.
I can do the.
Okay, but it will come back again, I think, the same, and then you will do, or I will do properly. Okay. Let's go back. Okay. This is another example, and it's interesting because it's a further level of aggregation. Because we have seen a single organization chart where nodes, points are single individuals. Then we have seen the industrial cluster network where nodes are companies, so the higher level of aggregation. Now we are looking at the international oil trade network in 2012. And again, it is a directed network. So this is in common with the two previous figures, but with the difference that here links are representing trade. And so representing money flowing from one country to another one. And what can we see? So that it's a further level of aggregation, that's countries. And as you can see, is a visual inspection, it's easier to understand that this network is much denser than the previous two networks. There is even a much more reciprocity. I mean, many links were going in both directions. And there are, I mean, the way to visualize the network, there are many techniques for graph visualization, but usually the most highly connected nodes are put in the center, just to favor the intuition, to understand who is mostly central. And are those countries in the center.
Question, are these firms or are these countries? What are
Countries.
Oh, these are countries, okay.
International oil trade.
Yeah.
So these are countries, so the farther level of aggregation. So Switzerland, Luxembourg, etc. So Russia, Italy, France, these the acronyms of countries. Okay, so this is another way to, another example, let's say, this is the European aerospace industry, and this is the visualization of the ownership relationship. So what changed, as you can see, there is another type of link. So one was decisions, organization chart. The other one was knowledge flow. The other one was money, trade between countries. In this case is ownership. It means ownership shares. That is how much money is invested by a company in another company. So here we see also some other interesting properties at first sight, that there is what is called different components. So not all of the companies are connected. They are connected in groups. These groups are called components in the jargon of network analysis. And one component, it is usually called the main component, is very much bigger than the other components. And it has also a lot of properties, a lot of implications, meanings, so on. So just to give you another example, so we have seen 4 different types of links: decisions, knowledge, trade, ownership. Different types of links. So let's start to have clear in mind, and so to distinguish, that one question is, how much is important a link and how many connections a single element has with the others, and that's a concept. Another concept is how many types of links are connecting the elements. And this is what we are going to see. How many links of the same type and how many types of links. 2 different aspects. Okay. This is one more, just to give you examples and then start familiarity. Again, the aerospace industry in EU 28, it was 2019, so there was still UK, as the previous figure. Here the links are representing still something different. Not ownership, but both interlock. So are connections between, these are all the types of interlocks, precisely, between the companies. So which companies have what is called or even interlock directorship, that is sharing some director into their boards. And here it is evidence also with the color, the most important countries of the network. That is UK, Spain, Italy, and France. So one step forward is understanding, and is what we are talking in a moment. That is, the number of companies is the same in this network and in the previous one, that of ownership, because there are 3,143 there were companies in EU 28 in 2019. And those are the companies of that industry. Between those companies, we can study different types of links. In the previous figure, it was represented ownership. In this figure is represented interlock coordination. So the same elements, the same companies, precisely the same, but looking at two different types of links. And this is what we are talking now. Okay, let's keep this for a moment. Right, this is clear. There is just one, each single node of the interfirm network is a structure. No? So we can call an industry network as a network of networks, because even each single company is a network. And so the industry, that is the interfirm network, is a network of networks. Okay, this is just to acquire one more point. Now, this is for a moment interesting to look at the question of what do we mean for system and what do we mean for network. This is something that is very much debated and unfortunately still unclear even in cybernetics and system science. In my view, I mean, system and network, we can take them as referring to the same thing, the same object. For instance, a company is a system because it has inputs and outputs. At the same time, it is a network because inside the company, as we have seen a moment before, there are connections between its elements. So a system is a network and a network is a system. So what's the difference? The difference is that when we are focusing on systemic aspects with systems, and it was actually the very important work did by system science, we are focusing on the aggregate properties of the object. Input, output, how input, output are related one another, how they relate with the environment. And so typically the feedback and the various types of feedbacks that we can have, the circularity, and so on. So many different aspects that are dealing with the system in its entirety, and maybe sometimes distinguishing also systems parts, subsystems inside it. Well, and what is the network perspective? The network perspective is typically a perspective into the micro inside. So when we are speaking at the systems, very often we consider the system as a black box, typically as is done also in economics, Oh, it's a black box. We look only at the inputs and outputs. And by the way, this was the typical view of behaviorists, So we don't know what happens in the mind of people, and behaviorists say, okay, we can only observe inputs and outputs. So stimulus and response, and what they do with the stimulus. Economists took precisely the same approach. I mean, it was exactly the same. So we look at the inputs, labor, capital, and land, and we look at the outputs. What is the output? What is the revenues or whatever? I mean, in the network perspective, we are opening the black box. It's not more black. We make it white, transparent, because we look inside and see what are the connections that provided some inputs, produced the outputs. And by the way, one very important point is that the inputs do not arrive to generally the system, as it was typically in the tradition of the black box approach. But some input go to some node, so to some element of the network, some others to other nodes. And if you change the inputs, if you change the receivers of such inputs, something will change also in the way in which the system works. And this is typically something that can be analyzed looking at the network, so at the structure of the system. So looking inside, what happens inside. And this also was the main point of the so-called second-order cybernetics. Because the first-order cybernetics, I mean the first wave, let's say, in the cybernetic science, was looking at the system in its entirety, life system science, and looking at the feedback with the environment. No? And even the circularity between the system and the environment. The system is influencing the environment and vice versa, and so on. Second-order cybernetics looked at the forms of circularity, the cycles inside the system. What is called self-organization, self-reference, self-observation. Any time that there is this small prefix, self, you are looking at inside. And what happens in sort of cycles, circularity. In fact, when we also look at ourselves from the perspective of consciousness, we are exactly doing an exercise in self-observation. When we think ourselves, what we did yesterday, what we did in our life so far, we are just looking back at ourselves. Is myself, Lucio, thinking at what Lucio was or is or what will be, no? So precisely cycle, no? Circularity. So these are two different views that are, let's say, complementary. So not that one is more important than the other, but we need both. So we need to understand a company or a community, a cooperative, like yesterday, or whatever it is, a country in the relationship with the environment, with the other countries, with the foreign policy, etc., etc. But then we should look at inside the company, inside the community, how people inside the community are connected. Because the distribution of connections can change everything. And that's the point. If you overlook the structure, you cannot really understand the system. So you can, if you limit your observation only to inputs and outputs, your ideas will be very, very much hypothetical because you continue to keep the system as a black box. Now, okay, let me skip this too long. So, social networks, let's say social phenomena, are typically multi-layered and interconnected networks. So now let's look, what does it mean multi-layer and what does it mean interconnected? Multi-layer is what I have provided before as examples. It means that, let's suppose that this is a network and these nodes, these points are representing companies. So this is an interfirm network. These firms can have connections in terms of trade, in terms of ownership, in terms of voting rights, that is interlock and people in the board of the other company, in terms of debts, in terms of investments, there is assets. Huh? So the network of companies is the same. It's precisely, if you see the same colors, the same nodes, but what changed from one slice to the other slice? What changed is the topology. Because each type of link in the same structure, I mean in the same set of elements, generates different topologies. So generates different structures. So the way in which the companies are connected in terms of voting rights will be probably very different from the way in which they are connected by trade or by investments or by debts. And this is what we mean for multi-layer. So in short, each type of link is called layer in the jargon. So multi-layer network means that in that network, there are different types of links connecting the nodes, connecting the elements. And so there are different topologies that we have to analyze to understand how that network works. I don't know why I go back. What happens? Got it. Previous one.
Maybe I can help from here. I can help.
Yes, can you go in the...
I can do it from here. You can keep it.
Okay, great. Before... so after, so... Okay, now this is a very important point because usually in most studies, even in social network analysis, only one single layer, so one type of link is analyzed. And, let's say why this limitation? There is a limitation due sometimes due to the complexity of the analysis, because more links means more topologies, it's not easy to manage it. Depends on data. Maybe you have data only about ownership or only about trade, and so you can analyze only that one because you have no possibility to do differently. But of course, we must be very careful because this restriction can lead to misunderstandings or lack of understanding because you are only looking at one aspect. Huh? So the other aspects can be very important, maybe more important. So you are only cutting one slice and you know what happens to the other slices. But this is what happens. Actually, the book I just published now with my collaborator, Robert Magnuszewski, about interlock coordination between firms, again in the aerospace industry, it was somehow, let's say, path-breaking into the field because we actually looked at the different types of interlock. Because there is not only both interlock, we actually discovered, it seems to me, first time in the studies so far, discovered that there is also department interlock. So many companies do not share directors, they share managers. So the same manager is appointed to, let's suppose, the ICT department of one company and the R&D department of another company. The same manager. And not necessarily there is also a director shared by the two into the board. And in fact, one of the interesting results is that they are not complement. Sometimes they are complements, sometimes they are substitutes. There is both, or there is only one of the two. And there is even a third way to interlock, which is the hybrid mode. There is a manager of a company that is sitting into the board of another company. So the hybrid situation, which is, by the way, very, how to say, somehow we call it asymmetric, let's say hierarchical, because if my manager is sitting into your board, I can access the strategic knowledge shared into the board. That is very precious knowledge at highest level. And in exchange, I will give you only less precious knowledge, that is that of operative knowledge, that's typically into departments. So I will know more and more important things about your company than what you will know about my company. And not by chance, we have found that this hybrid interlock is typically of the relations between a financial company and its debtors. So basically the bank says, okay, I borrow you, let's say, 10 million euros for your investments. And okay, you filled on in all the forms, give me all the guarantees, blah, blah, blah. But it's not enough. It's not enough. I, bank, want to know from your board what you are planning to do, what kind of problems can be, what are your strategies. So if you want my 10 million euros of investment or credit, yes, I will give you, but my manager, Mr. X, will be sitting into your board. And that's it. So, multi-layer, even if only looking at interlock coordination, 3 types of coordination: director to director, manager to manager, manager to director. 3 types. 3 slices, 3 layers. And so we managed to analyze these 3 layers, so analyzing the whole European aerospace industry according to these 3 layers, and the combination of the 3 layers that is combined into one single big network. And so that's exactly what should be done, basically, at least in looking at a single phenomenon. We have also, in a separate study, studied the ownership relationship between these same companies. And not yet done, this is something that I'm doing right now. For instance, wondering, is it likely that a board interlock is issued when there is already an ownership relationship? So do they tend to be complement one another, or they are substitute? If I have my share into your company, it's automatic that I will have one of my company into your board. So this is this the mechanism? So this is something not that it's just coming from comparing the 2 topologies, the topology of ownership and the topology of interlock or interlock. So, but for instance, there are unfortunately so far it seems to me that only Korea and Japan have detailed data or not detailed data about the network, the trade network between companies. As far as I know, no any other country in the world has gathered data about that. So doing what is really fundamental, that is the trade network between the companies, is something that, it could be done only with surveys, but surveys are surveys. Now, what's important, and it gives you the sense of the complexity of the question, is that there are, in social phenomena, there are not only different types of links, but there is also the question that the types of links usually influence one another. And this adds a lot of complexity to the story. Because it's not only that when we do, as I did, by the way, in this book, it's a static analysis. I'm taking a picture. So 2019, tac, what is the topology? What are the distribution of links? Blah, blah, blah. But so I didn't get the dynamic perspective. So what's going on? And in the dynamic perspective, the question is that the topology in terms of ownership is influencing the topology in terms of interlock or collaboration for innovation or whatever, and vice versa. So, in other words, if I have a lot of collaboration with you, most likely sooner or later we will, this is an hypothesis, by the way, it's not anything that is being confirmed yet by empirical studies, but it sounds a reasonable hypothesis. That is, if we collaborate a lot for innovation successfully, maybe we'll establish also an ownership link. So we try to consolidate, to invest one into the other, or maybe we will be in favor to share a director between our two boards. So one type of link, collaboration for innovation, R&D collaboration, let's say, can influence ownership or can influence interlock coordination, and vice versa. If we share, for instance, board or even only department interlock, and we understand that we are very important to one another, because I will appoint my manager into your company as a manager into your department, because, for instance, in the aerospace, you are a supplier, and your products are maybe crucial, very important for my product, for the aircraft. I want to be sure about standards, codes, quality, delay. No, there are no delay. Delivery time is just timing, etc., etc. The best to be guaranteed on at least a substantial improvement, increase of the guarantee of all this is that my manager is directly appointed into your department. So governing both departments. So when you are governing the departments, say, these are the codes, these are the standards, these are the requirements, these are the quality levels, etc., etc., etc. I'm doing a big step into being guaranteed that everything will be done in the proper way. The proper way is my way, or maybe that collaborate to develop a common standard, and that's collaboration for innovation. So collaboration for innovation is not separated from interlock, from ownership. All these type of things in the real world are very much connected, which means that these topologies, these different topologies generated by each type of link are interacting one another, are not separated worlds. Because at the very end, an organization, whatever organization, is a unity. So what happens in one aspect is somehow influencing also the other aspects. And so this is the result. And another property is that social networks, meant as networks of social phenomena and social phenomena, are also interacting networks. It's another property. which means that if two networks share one or more nodes, they interact, they co-evolve. There is a real, look at another real world example, just the outcome of an empirical study that I did 10, 15 years ago. Let's look at this slide. Okay. Oh. Yeah, well. So still the metropolitan area of Rome, meaning the Lazio region, two industrial clusters. One is the industrial cluster of the aerospace, here on the right side, in green. And the other one is the industrial cluster of telecommunications companies. Now what happens? It happens that some companies belong to both clusters. That is, they produce aerospace products and telecommunications products. The same company is member of two different clusters. And what does it mean? It means that these two clusters are two separate networks, but not totally separate, not independent, because they co-evolve together, because they are sharing some companies. Some companies belong to both networks. So they are responsible for the co-evolution of the whole network, which is the result of combining the two different networks, the two industrial clusters, as one big network that's co-evolving. So something, again, self-organization, but also hetero-organization. Something happens within the single network, within the single cluster, has its own internal dynamics. Remember Luth and his studies, There is just the evolutionary dynamics of each single cluster. But there is also a joint evolution. There is a co-evolution of the two networks, of the two clusters, because they influence each other, not only in terms of links connecting the two networks. That's of course a way to co-evolve also, with links between one, so a telecommunication company who is selling products to an aerospace company. That's of course also another way to influence one another. But in the case of interconnected networks, the influence is much stronger because it is inside the same shared part of companies, the same companies that are belonging to both networks. So it's something that is, the influence, the reciprocal influence is propagating and is affecting the dynamics much stronger than if only with a link between different separated networks. Okay, so what's the difference between just a multi-layer and interactive network? In a simple multi-layer network, nodes are the same. And there are layers, different layers, so slices, different types of links. In an interactive network, they need just to share some nodes, not necessarily all. So in that case, I will see it showed before, just let's say 10, 15 companies are members of both networks, of both clusters. And they influence each other, usually multilaterally, bidirectionally. Not one way in general, but it's a matter of empirical studies. Or sometimes unilaterally. And what is the point? The point is that interacting networks can be also multi-layer networks, and usually they are. And that's the complexity. So these two properties are found actually into the same networks. So most socioeconomic networks are multi-layer and multilaterally interacting networks. we have the two effects at the same time. So my view is that reality, the socioeconomic reality, or only social or economic, as you like, because I mean all these properties are in both kingdoms. I mean only social or only economic or both. There is reality is made of networks of networks. So networks of networks recursively interacting. Recursively, that there is over time influencing one another, so co-evolving horizontally, which means at the same level of aggregation, companies with companies, but also vertically, and it's what I'm going to show you now. So there is at least my view of in one single picture. So my view is roughly represented in this figure. I call it the nested hierarchy of co-evolving networks constituting human societies. So vertically, we find different levels of aggregation. At the bottom, individuals, and so individuals' networks, actually, friends, for instance, no? Our friends, we are so single actors, points of these networks. And somehow your group of friends is already part of my group of friends. We share one somehow, for instance, no? And we can share different friends. So it means that there is a horizontal connection between different networks that are influencing one another, so co-evolving, and that's why interacting, and so co-evolving horizontally. It means within the same level of aggregation. But then there is also the bottom-up step. That is, these individuals can create structures at a higher level of aggregation, for example, organizations. And so at this higher meta level respect to this, organizations are meta level respect to single individuals. Because we can keep, in this case, the points are not more individuals, but are the aggregations of individuals. That is, the groups of individuals. Let's call it companies, organizations, group of friends, whatever. So we have the organizational level. Here is the individual level. At a higher level, we have the organizational level. But then even organizations can create communities, so a higher level. For instance, a regional level or level of communities in which different groups join together, forming new structures. And this is the higher level. And in this level, the points are not more organizations, single organizations, but structures created by the organizations. And so on until we have industries, communities, societies, countries, at the country level. But we have also the international level, for instance, which is the level in which we find regions, let's say European Union, United States of America, or agreement between states like NAFTA or Eurozone, there is a super level, which is aggregation between countries. It's a superior level, or United Nations. No, these are superior. This is a superior level. So, in other words, we have a bottom-up evolution, so which is a vertical evolution. That is the co-evolution. What I want to communicate to you, I mean, to make clear, there is a horizontal co-evolution at the same level between different networks, but these networks create new structures. at the meta level. And these new structures are actually also co-evolving into that level. Okay, so we have co-evolution horizontally and vertically. And at the meta level, these are what in the literature of complexity theory are called emergent systems, emergent structures, with what is very much stressed now important, emergent properties. What does it mean? It means that the properties of the single elements of the meta level, when we look at the aggregate structures, are not more the same. New properties are created. So the behavior of single individuals, for instance, is very much different from the behaviors of the same individuals when they behave as a group. So group dynamics introduces new behaviors, unexpected behaviors, unexpected results. And so this evolution, this vertical evolution is creating, and it occurs through emergent systems and emergent properties. This is one of the most important form of complexity, when we are talking about what is complexity. This is one of the very clear way to see what is complex. What does it mean, complexity? Something that you cannot imagine before, because it's not belonging to the properties of the single individuals. It is an emergent property that you can see only when the individual is behaving as part of a new structure, of a new network, or if you like, as a new system. Now, what happens?
Just ask, we have about 1 hour, just about how much is...
I try to close in 10 minutes, 15 minutes. This is more or less the core of the discussion, in my view. That is, what is important is also that not only are micro, typically called in the specialized literature, micro, macro, emergent properties. And in sociology, as in economics, is one of the big questions. Even in economic theory, can we explain macroeconomics phenomena from the microeconomic behavior? No, the answer is no. Only in the magic models, that is totally unrealistic models of general economic equilibrium, in which you can model things and have aggregate behavior. But in fact, it is what we are going I'm going to argue, is that there are no networks, only independent individuals. General economic equilibrium is not implying, at the contrary, is denying any connection between the individuals. Independent agents. Each agent is making his own predictions, his own plans, and they do not make coalitions. They do not share any common behavior. Nothing. They just independent. Precisely what is called methodological individualism, in the pure sense. So, on the contrary, in reality, there are emergent properties, and this is the other aspect, very important. There is also the macro, micro effects. The coevolution, the vertical coevolution, is not only bottom up, it's also top down. Why? Because once you have created the new structures, the emergent properties, the emergent systems, then they influence, constrain, even at the lower level. So, example, a law is an emergent property, an emergent structure. So, people decide that it's the case to make a law about abortion, for instance. And it's a meta level, no? There is something that is created at the level of individuals, and then it works for the collectivity. And now, after that you have created that law is constraining the behavior of single individuals. There is an effect. So, again, and this is the triumph of second order cybernetics, again, circularity. The circularity means that it's bottom up and also top down. Top down through what is called in the jargon of complexity theory, downward causation. So you produce the new structures in the bottom up creation of new structures, and these new structures are influencing the same elements that created, from which they have been created. So this is a circular evolution in a vertical sense and a circular evolution in horizontal sense. Now, let's go. What is very important for me to underline, to stress, is that there is a strong connection between methodology and epistemology. In the sense, for instance, that a new view to look at things, for instance, network analysis, which is an epistemological question, that is, are there structures? Is there an ontological dimension that is different from attributes? And this is a typical epistemological question, I mean, philosophical question. Then it requires a new methodology, because you cannot study structures, relations with statistics, because statistics is for attributes. You need the new methods. You need a new methodology. And of course, once you have created a new methodology, this new methodology, different methodology, will lead you to discover new things. So it will affect also your epistemology again, no? It will reinforce or change your view of reality. So look, I mean, typically, if you have good techniques, methods, if you have the telescope or the microscope, you can discover things that you didn't expect. And so you can change your epistemology, your view of the world. So why new methods, concepts, and epistemologies? Because the ontological characteristics should lead to appropriate methods. And that's a very crucial point, and it's, of course, it can create a lot of, how to say, disappointments or reactions. And the point is, standard statistics is good for attributive and network analysis for relational dimension. Because in one ontology, an ontological dimension, you are studying attributes. Statistics is perfect. You should just reason in terms of attributes. What that class of people have in common, what is the typical parameter, I mean, the mean, median, variance, blah, 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 all of what? Of attributes. But if you are looking to discover structures, relations, you cannot do it with standard statistics. You need a new methodology, which is actually network analysis. By the way, if you go back at the typical handbook in statistics, it's very easy to test my argument. Look at the first early page of the statistics handbook. Well, they said that you need independence of the observations, independence of events, independence of cases. But if the events are connected in a network, by definition, they are not independent, they are dependent. So you are in full violation of what is the pillar, the requisite of standard statistics, that is the independence of the elements. They are dependent. If they are in a network structure, by definition, they are depending in some way that is described as links, but they are depending. They are not independent by definition, or one or the other. Okay, it's a question of logic. And the other requirement is the randomness of elements. And again, in a network, you don't have this property, in general at least. You can build, of course, random networks. This is one of the most important, let's say, drivers of the study in networking graph theory, working on random network. That is, but let's be clear, what does it mean? When mathematicians were studying and building from scratch graph theory, they started to study random networks, which means that given a set of points, I put links between these points at random. Okay, but once I put these links at random, the elements are not more at random. I mean, they are linked. They constitute a structure. And by the way, the real jump made by network analysis was just when they moved from theoretically built networks just for the study of theorems on graph theory to real networks. That is, real networks. I give you an example. In the development of graph theory, theorems were created supposing that all the points are the same, they're perfectly equal, and usually links distributed at random. But what happens in reality? That nodes are not at all the same. Companies are all different. There is IBM and the small assembler in the street, no? But they belong to the same industry, but they are all but the same. They are so different under any respect, and their links are not at random. Their links have a sort of precise explanation, and that is just what we should discover. So it's a big change, no, between the basic concepts. And so the other point I want to underline is just that.
To wrap up a little bit, because we want to have time for discussion.
Sorry?
We want to have.
Yes, I just stop here. It's the question of circular causality. That's also the other big violation of basic statistics, standard statistics, and in general of science. Science. Most people are. If we look, it's easy to do it. Let's look at take at random 1,000 papers published in the journals in sociology, economics, whatever, and look what they do. They never deal with circular causality. Even if two or more variables are connected circularly, as in the example I did before, they just take one variable as independent and other variables as dependent. So they break the circularity and force the reality to be linear causality, linear in the sense from one in one direction. It would be better call it one-way causality, no? From A to B, overlooking that in reality the phenomenon is made in a way that it goes also from B to A. So if you make a regression model, as typically it is done, looking at the series of A and the series of B, and you make your results, you are making a big, dramatic violation of the reality, because actually B is also influencing A, and you have to take them together. And this is another big gift that second-order cybernetics provided to science, and science totally overlooked so far. It's only a question of the cyberneticians. They speak of strange things. We don't care about them. No, we do regression models. That's the pillar of this job. No, take a variable that you have some reason to consider as the independent, and take other variables that you supposed to be dependent, and look what happens. And overlook the circularity. By the way, regression models cannot allow circularity, and that's the point. If there is circularity, a good book, a good handbook, and a lot of studies and statistics say you cannot build a regression model. It cannot be applied. If there is circularity, forget regression models. You cannot employ that method. Pity that reality is made almost always by circular causality effects. So what to do? And that's the conclusion. Let's say stop here. Please go on your go on. So it's the last relational methods. Go on. It must be relational methods. So we can grasp of circularity by using relational methods. There is not only social network analysis, click once, where it also NKFL, Boolean network fitness landscape simulation modeling, and neural networks simulation modeling, and agent-based simulation modeling. What's the difference? There are many differences, and I will ask you in a moment to show the other slide, but just say in very short. Social network analysis has the great advantage that it's simple. Basically, it's not complicated. So with the training of a few months of training, you can start working, and so it does not require big investments in terms of time, money, but it's quite a bit limited because basically it's in principle it's possible to do dynamic network analysis, but then it, in my opinion, it doesn't work very well. Actually, it's a lot of work and poor result. So the best method, the most powerful is that of agent-based simulation modeling, but it requires much more effort in terms of skills, time, effort. If you go one slide more, in this book published in 2016. I tried to, I hosted many authors, as you can see, in showing in their specific field relational methods and the epistemological aspects. Basically, are the relational methods shown in the previous slide, and in particular in the conclusive chapter, in the conclusion of this book, I discuss the relative advantage, limits, pro and cons of these main relational methods. So there is something useful also for concrete research. One have to understand how much time you have, how much money you have, how much can be the effort, and so decide to go to the shorter, simpler way that is social network analysis, maybe going into the way of the agent-based or other modeling that is here.
Mille grazie. Many thanks, Lucio. I saw there are some questions. However, I would maybe before, because there tends to be inertial forces, I have some quick comments, very short slides, just to respond perhaps to Lucio, and I would make those, and then we can come back to discuss and ask questions, if that's okay. Bob has would like to say something, I guess. So is it a quick question or for understanding?
It seems you are mute, Jerome.
No.
Your microphone.
Everyone could hear. So if it's okay, we can. I'll make some short comments and then we can have an open discussion. And I saw Igor also asked some questions.
Jerome, it seems that you are mute here in the microphone.
It's fine.
No,
it's to me. You were talking about feedback effects.
Yeah.
So if there are two microphones. Yes. So my presentation is very basic. I have not been involved with these issues as long as Lucio. And so I just would argue why network perspectives matter for achieving sustainability, actually. And to connect this topic with the discussion we had yesterday, I just wanted to cite a recent paper by the International Labour Organization, the ILO, talking about measuring cooperatives. So they say in this report that it aims to explain why there's a need for reliable and comparable statistics on cooperatives, how the guidelines can be used to support production of statistics and on cooperatives, and provide an overview of the further work needed to put them into practice. And so they talk about basically the need to measure the benefit that cooperatives provide to the economy in order to make a comparison with official statistics of the wider economy and labor market, and so on and so forth, and suggest that currently statistics on cooperatives are not always produced regularly, they're lacking in parameters, and so on. So I would say the point that Lucio made that I would like to agree with is that these are not enough. While there may not be enough statistics on cooperatives, there's still perhaps time to build an infrastructure that reflects other types of data. So to go back to a very early example of network analysis, Kurt Lewin, one of the pioneers of Gestalt psychology, a social psychologist, wrote an article in 1943, Psychological Ecology, asking a very simple question, just as an example of these relationships. Why do people eat what they eat? And in fact, he proposed what he called a channel theory, which you can see a depiction of on the right here. These are different channels that actually don't answer the question, why do people eat what they eat? But in fact, he suggests we should reform the question, how and why does the food arrive at the table? So and he basically says we have to begin not with the psychology of someone in the supermarket, and which pickles do I buy, but we begin with the environment-bound psychology. And so there are some distinctions, of course, there to be made. So the psychology of whom? So, for instance, the household, someone is purchasing food, who is purchasing food for whom? And so there are attributional distinctions, if it's a family with a history of migration. So he found that families with migration from Eastern Europe, from the Czech Republic, have a lot more canned food. They can their food. This is a cultural attribute. Lower income groups, for instance, as well, and so on. So there are certain attributional, again, statistical aspects that are important, but also at the same time there are, so to speak, structural relationships. So he speaks of a gatekeeper, also at the same time a rule, which reminds me of Karl Popper's notion of a propensity. So the gatekeeper, in fact, in this case, oftentimes 1943 we're talking about, was, say, a housewife who was actually making the decisions of what to buy. So the choice that this gatekeeper, or the rule, on the other hand, institutes is, which channel? Do we take it from the shelf on the supermarket, or do we take it from our garden? And then, of course, beyond that choice, you have a choice of which food. And of course, all the choices themselves are embedded in cognitive, cultural, economic structures. And so what food is not the same as the food for a particular family. So an African-American family may have a different selection in the finite universe of foods that even are considered edible, related to a family from the Czech Republic and so on. So at the same time, the same signal, the same type of food, the same price, for instance, can actually have a very different effect depending on the relationship or the context as I write here. So Levin mentions expensive meat as just an example. So the high price of the meat in the supermarket may actually prevent or slow down the decision to purchase the food. But the high price at the same time after the purchase actually accelerates the speed at which the food lands on the table because you don't want the very expensive meat to spoil. So again, a purely statistical analysis of the price of meat and its relation to purchasing habits is simplistic. You need a more coherent structural analysis of those relations in order to actually say things about how the food got there. And a second example from Paget and Ansel, they study actually the rise of the Medici in Florence, and basically they say that the argument that political or social or economic classes, you have the rise of the merchant classes in Florence, is not a sufficient argument because political groups, as they say, in the sense of sets of attributionally similar individuals who solve collective action problems in order to coordinate action on common interests, simply did not exist. So in Florence, and they say indeed, the more homogeneous the attributes, the less coherent the collective action. And they say that they do not argue that social attributes are irrelevant for party formation, but that the role needs to be understood within a deeper relational context. So that these types of categories of group interests are merely cognitive categories, which things like party mobilization, networks, and actions cross-cut. So basically, here on the right, we see a graph that shows the relations of intermarriage in the aristocratic families of Florence around the late 14th century. And at the bottom left, you do see the Medici, actually before the uprising that occurred in 1378. There were very linear relations, neighborhood intermarriage. So, I married the daughter of the neighboring aristocratic family and vice versa. However, after this uprising, there were more strategic intermarriages that cut across neighborhood and that created this very complex network of insiders versus outsiders with respect to who participated in this attempted coup d'etat to punish basically those who defected from their class relations. So basically, the idea of attributing certain self-interests to people or families who are marrying for certain relations is actually not clear depending on the context. So if there's a static context where the expectations can be assessed as to what the future brings, so to speak, in this case, these fixed role frames are clear. But however, in a situation of a civil unrest, or perhaps today with our issues of sustainability and war and pandemics, the games, as Paget and Ansel argue, are themselves up for grabs. So how people interpret the actions of others is quite unclear. And so clear goals, as they say, are not features of people, but they are interpretations. So again, we have to distinguish between the cognitive categories and the actual structures in which the relationships are embedded. One last example by Pfeffer and Salenzik, the external control of the firm, they suggest that actually organizations depend on resources and are not autonomous, and suggest things such as a contrast between a measure of efficiency, which is an internal metric based on, say, so to speak, the idea of a steam engine, how many resources does a steam engine use to power itself, versus the effectiveness, which is an external metric and depends on the perspective that you take and what you're including. So in fact, they do criticize the emphasis in much of management science and related fields on efficiency and suggest that in fact one should always relativize this with respect to what are the actual goals of the organization. But listing examples like co-optation or the interlocking boards, as Lucio spoke about, as an example. And so, well, I think all of this has basically already been said by Lucio. I know Bob Ulanovitz is here. He talks about autocatalysis, so feedback effects in interactions of interdependent system components create a kind of mutualism, a kind of a self-regenerating forces, so to speak, that actually Basically, you've already said all of this, Lucio. So to me, again, the attributional analysis actually only gives limited insight to differential network structures, which is why it's important to move away from reductionism. In designing, adapting, and transforming organizations does require knowledge as well as about the structure of the relations. And again, based on the discussion yesterday, cooperatives and any firm actually need to focus more on the structures in which they are embedded. And data is hard to come by, as Lucio has already said. And it seems to me, again, just to connect to the discussion yesterday, cooperatives which have always done more than statutory requirements can actually be innovators by revealing more information about themselves and start getting the ball rolling. And I think that's actually all of my. We have a book project that we're working on, the Rutledge Handbook of Cooperative Economics and Management, which again, we're looking at many of these topics that the path towards a sustainable economy leads through cooperation, and of course these emergent network structures. And so much discussion going on there, and will continue to go on management and the economics, of course, of cooperation at these different levels. And a master's program that Lucio and I are working on as well, connecting this idea of cooperation with sustainability. And of course, these network approaches will play a big role in this program. So going beyond just stakeholder theory and the talk, so to speak, of sustainability, and actually looking at how organizations can transform themselves within the structures which they're embedded, to be more sustainable. So that's it. And sorry for that. I wanted to just get those comments in to make sure we do have time for a discussion. So now we have some guests here are muted. We have some questions, and if of course there are questions from Isabel, comments, we can open up the floor to your questions. Igor, would you like to just let's see, can you speak now, Igor? You can say your question.
Okay, let's try. Can you hear me? Oh, perfect. Okay, basically, I have two questions and a comment, but I think the first question is already answered. You know, is the network structure defining interactions, or are interactions defining structures? It was clearly elaborated. It's a dynamic environment where both are affecting each other all the time, and they develop and learn. So I would skip that one if possible because of the time limits. But maybe another one is more interesting. Should we differentiate on the levels on the interactions, or is it purely a structural concept? So if we are talking about interactions, it's usually peer-to-peer. Even if we have interactions between organizations, you know, it's very rarely that one organization interacts actually with another. It's usually agents, usual people for now, that's actually do the interactions. So does it make sense to differentiate on the levels of interactions, or, you know, there are structures who are in networks who support some kind of interactions, right? Those are developed by the society. But on the interaction levels, frankly, I can't see it. Maybe a comment on that. Is it understandable? Okay. We are in networks. We are talking about dynamics and statics, right? And dynamics is the action which is going on, and the statics are the structures who are supporting that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, now maybe there are questions, I mean, semantic, I mean, different definitions. And my idea, I mean, the dynamics concerns the structures as well. and because the structures are telling you how the elements of the structure are connected one another, so are interacting between them. So I would say that, of course, there is the agency in related to the characteristics of the single actors within the structure, and the collective, the outcome of the combination of these different agencies, and that's the result of the whole network, or if you want that systemic level as a whole, or in the mechanisms in which the system works, that is the network structure. And I don't know exactly what do you mean for levels of interaction.
You were talking about the levels, the individual ones with the friends, and then going up organizational, inter-organizational,
What changed in that's I call them levels of aggregation. That is, depending on what is your unit of analysis, and so what is the level of aggregation that you are taking. You are dealing with single individuals. There is one level of aggregation, or superior level, there is organizations, etc., etc. Now, what I didn't say, but it matters, is that somehow I spoke about the downward causation, that is from one level of aggregation to another level. That is what an organization is doing or is trying to do affect its members, and not only its members. So what happens at one level of aggregation is influencing also the behavior of the inferior level, or even of the superior level. So we have a cross-level interactions, let's call it, in bottom-up and in top-down, in both senses. If this is what you mean for levels of interaction, I would call them levels of aggregation and interactions between these different levels.
Yeah, well, we know that we are building structures for joining networks. That's basically what society does, right? Now, what I was trying to point out, that interactions per se can really not be leveled. They can be aggregated. You're absolutely right. But the support structures, which we do develop, makes, that really makes sense to level them up, because you need substantial resources, for instance, to cover the United Nations level of communication, because they are worldwide, right? This is from the point of how to develop appropriate frameworks for networks interactions to work. Yes, and thank you for the lecture. It was wonderful, and thank you for answering this question. Maybe just another hint. When you talked about mechanisms to analyze networks, you were considering system dynamics as well, because that involves circularity, which you said is lacking in regular analysis portfolio.
Absolutely, I totally agree. Systems dynamics is a very important approach, and it's also a relational method, and it's one of the most important, and by the way, when historically one of the first looking at that. The difference is that system dynamics concern usually variables and concern let's say aggregates, I mean, it's a higher level of aggregation and considering variables. For example, there have been a lot of studies, flourishing of studies into the field of epidemiology, you know, for the COVID and the epidemics, and you are taking variables, how this variable is interacting with the other variable, and then considering the feedback effects and the functional, I mean, mathematical relationship between variables. In the network perspective, in the network analysis and agent-based models, in the list I have made before, the focus is not actually in the variables, but on the single elements, on the agents. I mean, this would deserve, this difference would deserve a discussion. It's quite a bit, not the time to do that. But anyway, very good for system dynamics. It's actually dealing with the question of circularity, feedback, circular causation. Excellent. The question remains, are we dealing with variables, or are we dealing, or our focus at least, our interest is more on agents, on elements? How do agents or elements interact? And just two words about that. I mean, two or more agents can interact in various ways. I call them types of leaks. We could call them variables. So then the question is, are you shifting from agents to variables, or you are keeping agents as the focus of the analysis? It's a bit different, no? It makes a difference, an important difference. But anyway, both are very, very important.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. That was great. Thank you.
Yes, we had some, thanks also for the question. We also had some other questions from, I think, Bob Ulanovitz. So can you hear me? Are you there? Hello, Bob. Can you unmute yourself?
Okay, I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you. Excellent, excellent lecture, Professor. I'll try to be very quick with a few comments. Number one, you didn't mention ecology. Ecologists have been working with networks since 1943, 80 years. And they all started out as quantitative diagraphs. In other words, most network analysis is with just qualitative binary diagrams. Ecosystems ecologists have worked with quantitative, and the results from the two, even in network analysis, can often be disparate. Okay, second comment is that in working with network analysis, we are going beyond the realm of physics because most people don't realize that physics deals only with homogeneous variables. Once you have heterogeneous systems, the logic of the laws of physics begin to fade. It's not that they're violated, they're not violated, but they become constraints. And actual determination is done via the structure of the networks. It's an extremely important difference, I think. And then, of course, when you get into heterogeneity, you get into combinatorics, which, of course, can go up exponentially very quickly. And that makes systems analysis in continuous terms very difficult. Stuart Kaufman has made quite a name for himself by talking about the limits to physical law. I think it was excellent that you, in the end, you talked about circular causality, because that's where virtually all the action is. And there are ways, incidentally, I'll mention that I developed at least one way of taking a network and finding all the cycles, disaggregating them from the network and so forth, that you can use to help come to decisions about that. That's, in this brief time, that's about all I have to say, but thank you very much again for your lecture, and thank you, Jerome, for hosting this.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. I think Margareta also had some questions. You were talking about Heinz von Förster. Can you unmute yourself? I'm seeing if... Margareta?
Yes. Hello. Hi, Lucio. So
Hi, Jamie.
I'm actually, I just was typing it in a form of a question. You use the word circular causality. And yesterday I was talking with Stuart Umpleby, who's a student of Heinz von Förster. Like, what is it exactly that Heinz von Förster is trying to communicate with that word? Dus that apparently plays very important role in your thinking also. And so I try to now rephrase it as a question, like, how did you go from starting to talk about human relations and thinking of corporations and organizations as bundles of relations, which is a very interesting view, and I think a very productive and fertile view. So how did you go from that focus to an argument that says, I need to appeal to downward causality, so not to action causality, no, to some downward causality. And then the next thing you say, and now I need to think in terms of circular causality. So I'm thinking, Lucio, you're trying to say something much more than those two words. And so I'm trying to find out what it is that you're trying to say.
I don't know if I well understood your question. That is, I think that all these phenomena are made by circular causality, and of course, for the sake of simplicity, sometimes we break that, no, and we took only one part, one side of the circularity, but it makes us blind and even misleading to the interpretation of phenomena. So your question was about the corporation and how do they can be seen as circular causality. Is it that you asked me?
Well, the question kind of begins with understanding what you mean by circular causality. And so I haven't really understood. You just say it's circular, but how do you know? And I thought maybe you know because you read Heinz von Förster using the word, but maybe you got it from somewhere else.
No, okay. It is not, I mean, second of the cybernetics and Heinz von Förster was one of the most prominent author in that field. Of course, was just focusing his efforts on showing the circularity usually named in terms of self-organization and in terms of self-reference. That is, you are looking at yourself, or you are part of your elements are interacting recursively. So I usually like more this other word, which is recursive processes, no? Which at the very end is the same meaning. That is something that goes in as a cycle. But if you look, I mean, different fields of science have been dealing with the same issue. For instance, in mathematics, we distinguish recursive functions. And recursive functions are actually what are used, for instance, to study deterministic chaos and other effects that are typically feeding back on itself. It's a variable that is feeding back on itself. And it's just the mathematics at the base of recursive processes. Even Heinz von Förster was using recursive function when in his picture he's doing even the nice pictures of self on the self on the self on the self. It's nothing so different than recursive functions in mathematics that actually are the base of all this set of phenomena. So In network analysis, for instance, usually it was not employed, this term, as recursivity, or it is, but it's a very precise term. There is mathematical concept of cycle, just cycles. And actually, recursive processes are cycles from A to B to C to D to A. That's just creating a cycle.
All right. I don't want to monopolize, so I'll just raise the question, and then maybe someone else can. So what do you think is the role of time in this all? Because if I include time, I don't see a need to say it's circular, because statistically speaking, if you look at how elements evolve over time, I clearly see there is an arrow of time. And so I still can maintain independence. So have you considered specifically the role of time and how network analysis addresses that question?
Jamie, you are introducing a very big issue. I try to answer you shortly in this way. Of course, there is always the arrow of time, no? So A influences B, that influences C in different steps of the time, no? And then feeding back to A. And that's basically what deal with empirical, in reality, because in reality there is always time. But if we want to look at circularity and self-reference without time, just is for us, Kurt Gödel has served the very beauty of what is self-reference in mathematics. There is a system, like arithmetics, that is theorems that cannot be demonstrated within the same system as true or false, because there is exactly the self-referential aspect, and they need to go to a meta level respect to that system. In that case, which is a logical circularity, and not empirical, that is not dealing with reality, but dealing in a magic world of mathematics and logic, where we can overlook time. That's exactly the main, at least one of the main results that has been produced by Kurt Gödel. There is just circularity and the consequences of circularity, that is self-reference within, let's say, mathematical objects and structures. And in that case, you have...
I have a question.
Yeah.
For Lucio. As part of my job description, or in my work contract, the name Philippe de Wood is mentioned as an advocate for returning, was a professor of business management at the UC Louvain, where Isabelle is today, and advocated in many of his books on corporate governance and similar things, business ethics, for a return to politics, to the enterprise. How do you think that social network analysis and similar perspectives, methodologies, epistemologies can help societies, states, governments, entrepreneurs, others, workers, to change, improve, perhaps? I mean, this is a very subjective statement. How do we put that in parentheses? The relationships at the level of the firm. I'll leave it at that.
Oh yeah, it's a very, very nice question. It's nice answer. It's just with a concrete case. One of the main research streams into the field of board interlocks is just based, is using network analysis, is just based on studying board interlocks as the formation and the result of elites, elitarian structures, superstructures that try to govern the behavior and to address the behavior of the big corporations. So that is precisely using network analysis. They try to demonstrate, and actually it's very interesting that the members, especially the interlock members of the big corporations, are forming a single group, an Italian group, that is getting the power. So they argue to explain board interlocks not as an effect of technological or other type of factors, but as the need of the power elite to get control and influence the behavior and the decisions of the big corporations. So somehow what we see at Davos meeting, no? There is the most important people are meeting there and are forming a group that is trying to steer the development of different countries through the main important companies. This is precisely network analysis, based on network analysis. Who are these people? How are they connected? No? If you look at the connections, you can explain something that at first sight seems disconnected, seems to belong to different aspects. By the way, another example is what you mentioned before. There is one of the field of studies application, let's say, of network analysis is just about what is called brokerage rules. No? Who is the gatekeeper? Who is the connector? Who between different groups within the same network or between different networks? Who is playing as the liaison or as gatekeeper or as different other types of roles in brokering, no, and making bridge between groups, and that's exactly connected with your example before, and it's one of the most interesting field of application of network analysis. So you can find answers to why people eat what they eat, depending on the communication structure, depending on who is the main influencer into that group and channeling one type of information respect to another type. And again, it's a question of structure, not a question of just of relative prices, as a standard economist would say. No, just look at the convenience in terms of prices. No, it depends on the structure.
Any other questions, comments, contributions? Leah has written that her question was already answered, so that is always a good sign. We've done our job. Yeah, and so we are about 5 minutes ahead of time. So, Bob, did you have another comment or just?
No, I just discovered I could turn on my camera. No, it was an interesting discussion, and I really think that first of all, this is a matter of distributed causality, and the circular causality is actually distributed causality, and there are reasons why it can be considered as a whole at one time, and that's apparently, you know, there are strains of physics where you actually look at the entire temporal evolution and consider it as a whole, and you have to do that also, I think, in networks with the circular controls, as I would call them.
Great. Thank you, Bob, for your comment.
Maybe a question then. Thank you very much for this very interesting talk. And I was wondering if you should advise the state seeking to support firms to make them more resilient and to support firms who are resilient, which are already resilient, so to increase their sustainability and to select the most sustainable already. What I got that one advice you would give is look at the network and how connected they are. Do you have other key dimensions here drawing from the network analysis? And what's your take on this?
Okay, let's say if I had to understand or to make a suggestion in terms of being resilient, it's, for instance, related also with the degree of connectivity. For just a, very trivial comment, but it's, I guess it's true. Let's say, as usually said, ceteris paribus, okay, provided things are circumstances are the same, then the more you are connected, and the more resilient you are, because you can lose, for instance, one of your suppliers, or more than one, or some of your buyers, but you can stay still on the market. You can still continue. You can still survive. No, in that sense, you are more resilient. So the more connections you have, the better it is. So if you are depending only on one supplier, if you lose that supplier, you die. No?
Yeah.
So
okay. So thank you. But then my follow-up question would be to think about. Let's take one simple example: is Amazon. Amazon is certainly hyper-connected to many suppliers and many consumers.
Exactly.
So it's clearly hyper-sustainable.
Of course.
From the perspective of the resilience of the structure itself. Is it resilient? Is it making society more resilient in the sense if you inject normative considerations? Then the counting the nodes, counting connections is not enough in a way. So what would be like?
Yes, I understand that your point. It's interesting. Not only one enough, I would say it's harmful. That is, what works for the resilience of the single node? So the question is just levels of aggregation. Are we focusing on single nodes? So the level of individual companies, organizations? Okay, my answer is the more connected you are, the better it is. You are more resilient. But if I'm looking at the higher level, there is the level of the industry, let's say, or the society, then if Amazon, if the presence of Amazon is damaging the resilience of the industry, because then when we are looking at the industry as a whole, Amazon is one point, okay? Is one of the other elements, one of the other nodes. But if that node is hyper-connected and the others are so lowly connected, then that's a danger for the resilience of the whole industry. Because if for some reason Amazon will get in crisis, then the whole industry will be disrupted, it will be damaged, severely damaged. And the other argument is that when it is so much dominating the whole industry, of course, there are questions about antitrust, about too much power into the same organization, and the questions is again. So what is good at one level? That's why for me, I stress that when we discuss about these questions, we have to decide what is the level at which we are putting our attention. Is it the level of individual companies, or is it the level of industry? Because the policies, the recommendations can be completely different, because different networks. Of course, they influence. Of course, what Amazon does is the single company is influencing so much the whole industry just because it's a supremacy, it's a prevalent position.
Maybe back to my short presentation, I did not emphasize this point, but in this discussion with Padgett and Ansel on the rise of the Medici in Florence, to me seems like an orthogon or just an analogy for Amazon. And the network relations of the citizenry of Florence and the political, mainly political, but also economic relations, were developed to such an extent that most of the connections after 1430, whatever, 1334, were going through Cosimo de' Medici, the one guy, one man. And so this seems to me an analog to this relation to Amazon. So if Cosimo is insane, or he dies, or something else,
crash down
the entire system collapses. And so this to me is a very clear example of the unsustainability of such concentrated networks.
Yeah.
And then from the individual perspective, I think you can also talk about rights and need for agency, robust action, as they use the term, and the inability to have this when you're in a coercive working relation with metal detectors and surveillance cameras, and your iPad is observing how many bathroom breaks you take and all these other things we know about Amazon. So that I think that's a different level, but I think that this is also something that you can talk about in the sense of resilient sustainability of an organization itself. And
if I could add, this can be quantified. There's always a dialectic between redundancy and specificity, which is what we're talking about. You can use information to apply to networks to find out exactly how much a particular network is efficient and constrained, and how much is free and disordered. And you need both of them in order for sustainability. Also, as Lucio pointed out, if you change the frame of reference from the individual industries to the larger one, you can get different answers, but it can be quantified. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, totally agree with you. I mean, changing different levels require different perspectives and different recommendations. It's just that's why political implication is that's why you shouldn't have a Berlusconi, as a politician, because in that case you are using the perspective of a single business. Put into what is the higher level. It's the level of what is the benefit, what is the good for the collectivity. By the way, they're fixing the levels.
We have that same problem in Florida. Our governor, who's also apparently a candidate for president, wants to become a dictator, essentially, and it's just terrible. The state is really suffering from it.
Exactly.
Yes, may I maybe offer an alternative word instead of higher level? There is also the stakeholder theory that doesn't require me to say higher level at all, but who are the stakeholders? Who is speaking on behalf of which stakeholder? How are stakeholders developing coalitions? And so this is a way of moving forward that really focuses on communication. And it's from that angle that I was reluctant to go with the concept of circular causality and also downward causation, because it gives the impression it's that we're not in control, while in reality, the whole point of thinking cybernetically is that we can actually make a difference. And in order to make a difference, the first thing we need to think about is how do we communicate, and will our interlocutors actually understand what or grasp what we're trying to say. So I think Isabel was really asking a question about stakeholders, if I may. A stakeholder perspective.
Yeah.
I think we're a bit over time. We should probably end it now. I think we can continue this discussion probably infinitely, and I know we have very interesting guests here, very esteemed guests, and so yes, I would like to respect everyone's time, and so we can continue in a bar in Florida or
virtual bar.
So thank you to everyone for being here, and yes, I hope to continue the discussion.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jerome.
Yeah.
And
Bye.
Dr. Biggiero.
Ciao, Bob. And
Ciao,
Jamie.
Lucio.
Bye.